Hello, welcome back. Today I'm back at the Riverside Cemetery in Denver, Colorado. We're going to be visiting the original grave of Chin Lin Sou. He was one of the earliest Chinese immigrants to Colorado and was also considered mayor of Denver's Chinatown. So I'm going to tell you about his story as we go look for his grave. Chin Lin Sou was born in 1836 in southern China. Little is known about his early years except that he received an education and learned to speak fluent English. He left what was known as Canton between 1855 and 1858, one of many immigrants fleeing the Taiping Rebellion from 1850 to 1864. Chin arrived in San Francisco just as American railroad construction gained momentum. Railroad magnates throughout the 1850s and 1860s recruited Chinese immigrants to build their railways. The work included blasting mountainsides, clearing rubble, and erecting retention walls. The railroad companies failed to formally record deaths, but engineering reports and newspaper articles suggest that hazardous work conditions from avalanches and mudslides, lack of safety regulations around explosives, and disease killed hundreds of Chinese workers each year. The railroad paid these Chinese laborers less than their white counterparts, who received free food rations and worked fewer hours. The Central Pacific Railroad hired Chin to work as a foreman of Chinese laborers. As an educated foreman who spoke English, Chin was able to escape the fate of many impoverished Chinese laborers who died in obscurity. After the Central Pacific joined the Union Pacific to complete the first transcontinental railroad in 1869, Chinese immigrants were hired to build and maintain other lines. Chin found work with the Denver Pacific Railroad as a foreman overseeing Chinese crews building a feeder line connecting Denver to the Union Pacific at Cheyenne, Wyoming. After the Denver Pacific was built, Chin remained in Colorado, where in 1870 he became a supervisor of Chinese laborers near the mining town of Blackhawk. As mining foreman, Chin hired workers, drafted contracts, purchased supplies, and negotiated wages. Chin also started to deal in abandoned mining claims. Western territories forbade Chinese miners from filing original claims, forcing them to work mines that had been discarded by white-only operations. In turn, Chinese miners specialized in the less profitable form of placer mining, using water to collect surface-level gold in stream beds. Unlike other Chinese immigrants who turned to cooking and laundry when placer mining failed them, Chin made a small fortune by buying and selling abandoned mines. His success as a mine manager challenged many of the stereotypes of Chinese immigrants. Chin defied the usual Chinese stereotypes because he stood 6 feet tall with blue-gray eyes, spoke fluent English, dressed in the Western style, and became a naturalized American citizen. His acceptance into society was an exception to the norm. Newspapers regularly praised him for his intelligence and entrepreneurship, while they disparaged other Asians. In 1892, the Fair Play newspaper described Chin as, quote, one of the whitest of his kind, end quote, and 2 years later labeled him as, quote, a more than usual intelligent Chinaman, end quote. Chin was a naturalized citizen with a family and was an outlier. By 1880, there was a thriving Chinatown in downtown Denver, located along Wazi between about 14th and 17th Streets. It was also called Hop Alley, based upon a slang word for opium. On October 31st, 1880, in a saloon located on the 1600 block of Wazi, an argument broke out between two pool-playing Chinese and some intoxicated whites. When the Chinese slipped out the back door, they were attacked and beaten, beginning Denver's first recorded race riot. About 3,000 people congregated quickly in the area, shouting, "Stamp out the yellow plague, and the Chinese must go." Every visible Chinese person or business was attacked. It was called a bloody riot. A number of Chinese were subject to brutal beatings, leaving dozens severely injured. A 28-year-old man named Luke Young was actually killed. He was beaten and dragged through the streets by a rope around his neck, and I believe they hung him on a lamppost. Most of the buildings in Chinatown were ransacked or burned at a loss of $53,655, which is equivalent to about $1.5 million in 2021. None of the people that participated in the destruction and murder in Chinatown were held accountable, and the Chinese were not compensated for their losses. Some decided to remain in Denver and rebuild, but most people left the city shortly after the riot. The only thing left of Chinatown is now a historical marker in downtown Denver at 20th and Blake Street. It is controversial because the plaque states it was a Chinese riot of 1880, when in reality it was an anti-Chinese race riot. The Colorado Asian Pacific United Group are trying to get a new plaque up to be more positive and celebrate the history of Denver's forgotten Chinatown. And just last month, actually, on April 16th, 142 years later, the city of Denver officially apologized to Chinese immigrants and their descendants for the city's role in the anti-Chinese riot. And during the event, Mayor Hancock signed the letter of apology and handed it to the families of the Lung and Chin families, along with honorary gold coins, which are comparable to the key to the city. Chin Lin Sou and his family were one of the few that was prosperous after this riot. Chin Lin Sou, while still managing many mining operations in the mountains, had relocated to downtown Denver. He and his family lived at 2031 Market Street for many years. To many, he was the unofficial leader of this community. He helped organize something called the Six Companies. This was a group of business and insurance companies operated by Chinese Americans. Chin used his financial success to assist Colorado's growing Chinese community. Between 1870 and his death in 1894, he supervised hundreds of Chinese placer miners near Blackhawk, Central City, Denver, and Fairplay. With his mining associate, Edward Thayer, Chin also opened supply stores in Gilpin County. In Denver, he participated in the Qing Kong Tong, a Chinese fraternity dedicated to providing financial aid to Chinese-owned businesses and helping the Chinese community. Unlike many other Chinese immigrants, Chin earned enough money to pay for his wife's passage from China, and the couple had 6 children. In 1873, their first daughter, Lily, made news as Colorado's first Chinese-American child. Nicknamed the Belle of Chinatown by the press, Lily grew into a fashionable socialite. Chin died of a long-term illness on August 10, 1894. He was originally buried here at Riverside in an unmarked grave until his family exhumed his body and returned it to China. Almost a century later, in 1977, the Ethnic Minority Council of the Colorado Bicentennial Commission co-sponsored a stained glass memorial at the state capitol dedicated to minority leaders. Chin was included in the memorial, but he was shown in a red Chinese gown rather than his typical suit. 5 generations of Chin's descendants have lived in Denver. Chin's son Willie Chin ascended to his father's position as unofficial mayor of Chinatown after his death. Willie's 2 sons, William and Edward, both served in the U.S. Army Air Corps during World War II. Their sister, Wawa, graduated with a business degree from Colorado Women's College. So again, originally Chin was buried in an unmarked grave here, and I contacted the cemetery to find it. It's actually between these 2 tree looking ones. So he is right in line with this Clinton Hanny. So he's in this same row. And like 2 spots over from Grant Sire. So I'm in block 26 at Riverside. And it's pretty easy to find, again, if you can find these 2 tree posts here. So looking at the cemetery map, he was originally buried right about here in the center of your screen. Now what's interesting to me is he was still in an unmarked grave, so I don't know if it's because his family knew that they were going to exhume him and move him to China eventually, which they did about 7 years after he was first buried here in 1901, I believe. But it's just very surprising, especially because Chin was so well known and respected, and also very financially well off. So it just surprises me that, you know, he was here unmarked for 6 or 7 years before they moved him to China. Now, the cemetery did tell me that this plot is now a John Ewing is buried here, also in an unmarked grave. So I always kind of wondered about that too. If someone gets removed in a plot, do they reuse it again? And in this case, they did. So now there's a Mr. John Ewing in the original grave where Chin Lin Sou was buried. So very interesting. And actually just a few sections away, so earlier we were up about there, a few of his kids are buried here. So we have his famous daughter Lily Look here, 1873 to 1933. And then we have William Chin Sr., 1888 to 1939. Looks like maybe there's another relative over here later on. This is Henry Wing Chin, 1923 to 1942. And I also noticed this one up here, so I don't know if this is also a relative. Ling Ju. Yeah, I think it is a little sad that they moved him to China, because I think Denver was a very big part of his history and life. And, you know, a lot of his kids and relatives are buried here in Denver. Rest in peace to the Chin Lin Sou family. Hope you enjoyed that video and getting to see the original grave of Chin Lin Sou. Please like and subscribe for some more videos, and I'll see you at the next grave. Thanks.